Hey guys, welcome to the latest episode of Beyond the Tape, a podcast that chats with people around the Australian mountain bike industry doing right things and making waves. This episode is a Tech Talk specific episode where I chat with Mick Williams from Williams Racing Products and Spin That Up, aka Lachy Mckillop from PSI Cycling, SRAM expert. In this episode, we kind of chatted about brakes and a few other things. We went in a bit of a rabbit hole when it came to pro athletes and designing their own bikes after Nico Mullally released his new kind of self-funded, self-built team. Before we deep dive into this episode, let me thank some sponsors. In this one, we've got Lead Out Sports as one of our major sponsors. These guys import Pedros. They import Abbey bike tools. They import a bunch of tool porn, and they offer some of the best tools you can possibly get. So it's only natural that they support this podcast. Don't forget that if you ask a decent question and it ends up being one of the best questions, you can win a $100 voucher to get some sweet Pedros stuff for your workshop. Taylor Trails are Tassie's specialist when it comes to statewide transfers, private group shuttles, all-inclusive packages. They operate on all the mountain bike networks in Tasmania, including Derby, Maydena, St. Helens, and the West Coast. So if you just want to forget about organising all that crap and you just want to pack your bike, get on a flight, go to Maydena, go to all those amazing parks and forget about everything else, hit up Taylor Trails because they'll get you on the tracks with less fuss. FE Sports are among the leading experts when it comes to supporting product imports, distribution, wholesale, and customer service in both Australia and New Zealand. They are the official distributors, man, talking is hard today, for brands such as 100% Pirelli, Wahoo, and Aftershokz, and a bunch more. So hit those guys up if you're looking for some premium goods to go on your bike. Now, if your suspension is running a bit average, hit up NS Dynamics. They're Australia's premier service centre in Australia when it comes to suspension. They've been doing this for over 20 years, and they know how to make your suspension feel buttery smooth. If you're looking for a bit of a custom tune, they offer the 4-sprung tractive tunes. They can sort out all your needs and have a custom shock. It'll just feel better. Trust me. Once you go custom, you can't go back. Frank Mountain Bike Apparel is Australia's premium mountain bike apparel company. They're based in WA, and they're at the cutting edge when it comes to lightweight racing jerseys, durable shorts and pants, and the designs are super eye-catching without being over the top. Two Up Bike Co. offer some of the most niche products, yet high-end, delicious sexual products. And that sounded weird. The Nova Wheels, Factor Components, and Du Monte Lubricants are some of the best stuff I've ever run. The Factor hubs I've got on at the moment are just flawless. Super easy to service, work really well, high points of engagement, nothing much else to say, man. It's a good thing that I've got good brakes on my bike because those wheels roll fast. Dirt Surfer are 100% recycled mud guards. They keep the mud out of my eyes. Crush Os keeps the mud off my bike. And Fist Handwear keeps the mud off my hands. With those guys, you can't go wrong. Your bike will be looking better. It will last longer. And man, those Fist gloves are so damn good. Anyway, that's long enough. Enough of me dribbling. Enjoy some breaks. Enjoy some talk. And as per usual, grab a beer, grab a water, grab a wine, grab whatever makes you happy and enjoy the episode.
Yeah. Rad. We're doing it. I'll do it. Yeah. Lachy and yeah, this is all winging. I've got nothing written down here. I'm sick of typing on a keyboard.
Me and Lachy never have anything written down. So.
Oh, I've got second screen going today, actually. I've got more business.
Yeah,
but, I don't really have anything for work on there, but I could. I don't know. I could get up one of those articles you sent. There we go.
I think you bring out the Etch-a-Sketch every now and then, Mick. That's fine.
yeah, that counts. The mini whiteboard.
That's so good.
It is.
I've got it sitting in front of me. Yeah, it's got heaps of shit on it at the moment. Actually, I'm banished from the whiteboard today because it's got important stuff on it. I can't rub it off. So,
the secret sauce, all your 11 herbs and spices.
Yeah.
All right, let's do this. Mick and
mate,
Lachy.
Let's do it. It's already started. You've got to leave that bit in.
I will leave it in. How you guys doing? You doing all right? Thanks for coming on.
Good, mate. Good to see you.
We're good.
It is. Last time I saw you in the flesh, and it was weird. I was kind of confused that I could touch and shake your hand and stuff. It was weird.
I like that you used touch just then.
I was going to say, I can't remember too much touching.
Oh, sorry, you're asleep. Yeah, that's staying in. Cool. We're going to talk about brakes and stuff for this one, but I thought I might start off with a bit of news. And I thought this one was cool after talking about the Sprag clutch in last week, but the new magnetic pulse hubs, which are a collab between Stans and Project 326 or 236.
321.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that, Mick? Did you have a look?
I didn't have a look, no. So the Project 321 guys, I believe they've actually had a Sprag clutch hub before. I've never ridden a set. I don't know if I've ever even seen a set in the flesh, but I know a couple of people have told me about them and rate them. I reckon I'm going to Google it now, but I reckon they had a Sprag clutch rear hub for a while.
Their fresh one uses magnets in a rut.
Yeah,
in poles. Yeah,
for sure. So the magnetic spring, replacing the spring with a magnet, has been done before. It's been done by a couple of companies. A couple of BMX guys have done it. So yeah, I think that's cool. Probably reduces a bit of weight. They're saying, from the quick headline that I read, apparently they're saying it reduces friction, which, they didn't say reduces friction. They just said it would roll better, which I guess in turn is reducing friction. Maybe. I guess so. But yeah, it's a cool little thing. It would certainly reduce the moving parts and a little bit of weight. But yeah, I've only heard of good things from Project 321. I think they're an American company, aren't they?
Yeah, I think made in New York or something like that.
It made sense with the like they were saying. Actually, I'm gonna look the line up because the line was actually really funny for them at first. There we go. All hubs suffering from momentum robbing drag. So I just thought it sounded quite epic. But yeah, it does make sense because the poles are at their weakest connection to the magnet when they're coasting, as opposed to a spring, which is the other way. I think that was the theory behind where they're reducing that drag a little bit. So It makes sense. I don't know if I was like, when I first saw it and it said magnet, so I was like, ooh, I don't know about that. But I think it makes sense if it works. It's better than a spring setup, I reckon. But as long as the magnet doesn't break or something get caught in there, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was about to say, I'm glad that it's just not Stans building those hubs.
They make a great. What's the Gary Fisher one? Like strong, light, cheap. Choose two.
Yeah,
theirs were light. Yeah,
yeah,
cheap.
Exactly.
I think the other thing too is, and like I said, I haven't read the article. I'm just kind of thinking about this as we're speaking, and I think there's some clout to this though. But like if say with like an Industry 9 hub and other hubs that run this type of setup, but a lot of hubs will run like a multiple step in the pawl. So I haven't got a pawl out at the moment, but like the pawl will have multiple steps in it to grab. And both those, say if it's got 2 steps, both those steps won't be engaged at any one point of time. It's to increase the points of engagement. So each step might be, just say it's half a degree out or whatever. But I'm just thinking about this now. I never thought about it before. Is that, like you were just saying, Lachy, is that with a spring underneath the pawl, it would mean that the lowermost step has more spring tension behind it than the uppermost step. So I'm thinking, you know how like some i9 hubs, like the Hydras, I mean, and I've ridden a set as well, they quite often clunk, like it'll skip a tooth.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking that maybe the reason why it skips a tooth is to do with the spring tension, is because it wants to favour the most tension. So if it's sitting on the lowermost step of that multiple stepped pole, it actually wants to spring out into the lowermost step, if that's making sense. I've never really thought about it before, but mechanically that would want to do it.
Don't the i9s as well rely on flex? I remember someone telling me this, and I haven't never read anything about it, but they actually rely on the free hub, like flexing a little bit. I have to look this up. Maybe I'm just making this up, but I'm pretty sure someone told me it relies on that flex a little bit, and that's what allows it to engage so well.
That's pretty gnarly if it does, because I certainly wouldn't engineer flex in it. But
well, I think that's where
they're probably smarter than me.
Have some problems sometimes, from what I've heard. But yeah,
I know it was a thing when because I've got a set of hydras, and they quite often, and like they're great hubs. So don't get me wrong, they're probably the best, like the lowest friction hubs that I've ever ran. But if you put the power down, you can quite often make them skip a tooth.
Yeah, I've got mine and I love them, but it gets that clunk a bit on that Jekyll actually, which is quite weird.
All that idler stuff going on.
Little magic.
Problems. Yeah. We'll move on to the next one, because I think we talked about this before with the quick release saddle clamp. But Mick, did I see that you got one of those? Like the quick release?
Yeah, I've got it behind me. Hang on a sec. No, you're probably talking about a different. Yeah, this is the one for the angle. I'm not sure if you're talking about the same thing, Darren. You're talking about something different.
No, that's one.
Lucky I haven't installed it yet.
Here's what I prepared earlier.
Yeah, this is from Anomaly Constructs in Canada. So this is one of their first. This is like one of their first ever ones. It's just in a raw aluminium. So it's slightly two-tone because one is a seven. They're two different grades. I'm assuming one's a 7075 and the other's a 6061. So it's a slightly different color, like two-tone. But yeah, it's a really neat little piece of magic. I really like it. And it comes in this nice little box. So yeah, I'm pretty stoked on it.
Checking their website. It looks good, eh? I'd seen it.
Yeah,
but,
it's cool.
And does it go into all seat posts or just reverb?
Well, no, it goes on to, I'm not sure if it's every single seat post, but they claim most seat posts. I know I've got an X Fusion on my common style, and I know it fits that. So
here we go.
Most saddle and post combos.
Type 1 does one up and Fox. Type 2 does reverb, and X Fusion. Type 3 does the new transfer. Sick.
There you go. Yeah, what's really cool is I guess they're a company that have just sort of come out of nowhere. Like, it's just a bunch of guys that had this idea and brought it to fruition. So I've kind of known them somehow. Well, actually, it was Dave Habich that put me onto them. They must have got some type of exposure, and they were very, very small. Like, hadn't, it was in the infancy. And yeah, we started talking on Instagram and whatever. But that's what's kind of cool there, from the ground up type thing. So yeah, anyway.
What would one use that for? Like, what's the purpose? Is it so you can have it angled back when you're descending, or is it so you can have it angled down when you're climbing, or both? Or
yeah, so it's got three different tilt options. So it's got like a, back, middle, forward.
Yeah.
So the idea behind it, I guess, is so you can have an ideal climbing position.
Yeah.
And I guess really mainly for aesthetic is that, and I'm a little bit the same, like, I hate to say it, but one of the reasons I don't have my saddle angled really far forward is just because I hate the look of it when it's slammed.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So I kind of put up with a little bit of discomfort because, like, I'm not a huge climber anyway, which some people would say is stupid. It probably is, but, like, I just hate the look of bikes with a really tilted forward saddle when they're slammed. So I guess that's a lot of the reason.
It looks here like it puts it 10 mil more forward as well. Yeah, that makes sense. See, I don't care. I love having my seat jammed forward and slightly down. I don't know why.
Yeah.
But because it looks cool on the roadie, I suppose.
I guess it depends what you're doing too, hey, like, and I think it's, as much as I hate to say it, I think it's a lot of a scene thing. Like, let's just say hypothetically you lived in Queenstown and you were pedaling up to go ride like Dream Track for a couple of hours.
Yeah.
Is that I actually think it would come into its own a lot there, because like you want it angled forward to pedal up, because it's a pretty steep climb and all that. But if you're shredding with the boys, you don't want to ride this ridiculous funny car seat.
Yeah, it makes sense. And then it's like, for me on downhill mode, I'd probably just switch it to set back as opposed to changing the post out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Like, were you finding you needed a different
like,
position for climbing, or as well, like, because you were leaving it flat and you were like, oh, I really want it lower and light up the front?
Oh yeah, mine's way too neutral at the moment. Like, I need mine tilted more forward. I just hate the look. I think the other thing too is like, and again, I don't want to get too caught up in, you know, bike aesthetic and whatever, but it does mean a lot to people. Is that I also think it depends on the bike too. Like, say for instance, like your Cannondales have got a fairly flat top tube, whereas say my common style, like the Meta, has got a very, like the seat stay and the top tube are parallel. So the top tube's quite slanted. So when you've got a pointed forward seat or a neutral seat, it even looks more pointed forward because the down tubes, or the top tube's so slanted, which just by your eye just kind of puts you off. Again, I don't want to get too into the aesthetic of it because I don't want to sound like a wanker, but I know it does mean a lot to people.
Let's be honest though, like aesthetic's a huge part. You're not saying like a wanker.
It's huge.
Every bike build I have, like I literally built a bike the other week, and because I didn't have the right bar tape, I didn't have the right bar tape. Like, yeah, it's a massive thing. Yeah. So I totally get that.
For sure.
Yeah. That's cool.
Last one we'll jump onto, which I think is the coolest and one of the best things I've seen in a long time. Nico Mullally's self-built World Cup downhill bike, well, self-designed, built by Frank the Welder.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think I listened to the Downtime podcast, not to speak on the podcast, but just with him chatting about it. And I just think the whole thing of not being locked into a design was really cool. You know, like, he didn't badmouth any other brands, which I think is good. But, you know, he's like, oh, there's aspects of this and that I wanted to change and all that. And yeah, Nico's fucking smart. Like, I've luckily spent a little bit of time with him when he was over in Australia a few years ago and chatted to him since. He's really switched on guy. But I just kind of like that. It's like, you know, he said it's like the last few years of my career kind of thing. I'm just going to do what I want. It's like, fuck yeah, that's rad.
I'm going to go off on a, like, this is honestly really hasn't occurred to me now. So like, I could be just totally off the mark, but I'm going to make a prediction and say there's going to be more of that stuff in the future where athletes put together their own program. Like, I think it's, you know, he is kind of ahead of the time, so to speak. But I think it's going to be a thing going forward. Like, in 10 years, I think you might start to see more of it, because I think whether it's down to social media and the power that personal identities play or whatever, I think that guys like him have the following to pull it together to make their own program work. Whereas in the past, we'd say without social media and that type of stuff, is that you relied on the team and the team's backing and the team's funding and whatever to get the exposure to bring that all together to then go to the races. Like, yeah, of course you need to have that personality to start with, but all I guess I'm saying is it wouldn't surprise me if more guys started to do that in the future.
We already saw that last year, right? Because like Hayley Winton did her own thing with lack of sponsors, but then you had like Joe Smith, Phil Atwell did his own thing, like he's on his own program now. In some respects, like the Ride Union crew, like they're kind of doing their own thing.
And well, even Brendog to a degree. Yeah. Brendog's even the same. And
we've even
I think you're just going to. And
we've even had Australian crew, like they're just like, well, the Oz Cycling's not going to send us, so we'll just do our own UCI team.
Yeah,
Like,
Yeah, for sure. I guess, like, yeah, totally agree. I'm also think, like, my point is, like, at the top end, I think you're going to get guys that are really quick, actually bringing together, separate factory brands. Like an ex-World Cup, ex-World Champ guy, or whatever. Or not like ex. I mean, what I mean by that is, like, they've got credibility. Saying, like, hey, I've got a personal sponsorship being RockShox, but I've also got, like, bringing their own personal sponsors together to run their own team without any kind of,
I think it makes sense. Like, and we talk about this with the geometry stuff, right? Like, I think there's so much more scope for small adjustments here or there, depending on everyone's, like, height and flexibility and weight and proportions and all that kind of stuff. And no bike really offers that, you know what I mean? And then when you're in a sport, which, everyone says is going to be the F1 of cycling, and it's coming down to tenths, I think that stuff matters, even to the point you're saying with Trinity, and choosing your BB drop, like, I think those guys need that, like, hey, we're riding at, this average gradient on this track, and I'm feeling in the corners, the bottom bracket's not low enough or high enough, whatever it is. I think it makes sense to be able to swap that stuff out. Like,
yeah, for sure. And, like, not to take the podcast down a rabbit hole, even though it's a common theme, but, like, I was listening, and I'm not a huge F1 fan, even though, like, I like the sport, but I'm, it's not that up with it. But I was listening to a podcast with Daniel Ricciardo the other day, and, just how much stuff, and a lot of their stuff's telemetry and, on the fly adjustment. And obviously they've got a whole team of engineers and whatever. But I think that, those guys change so much stuff race to race, whereas mountain biking, of course, mountain biking stuff changes race to race, but it's a click here or a click there. It's not like dramatic car changes like they have in F1. And I'm not saying you want that in downhill, but what I'm saying is I think just say the option of, like, different bottom bracket heights and whatever, stuff like that. I think that once you really understood what's going on, I think things would change more than what people would think, depending on track.
Yeah. I think the suspension accommodates. Sorry, no, yeah.
No, you're right. I was even having a chat to Chase, like, who's part of Trinity, the other day, and this is probably letting the cat out of the bag a little bit, but, like, we were chatting the other day and being like, we can forecast a point where we're talking about it because Anaheim 1 was coming up, right? And you think of downhill mountain biking, like the World Cup scene, you say, like, the biggest teams, like, say, Trek or Specialized or whatever, they've got the riders and the mechanics. And then you've got some support crew, of course, like you might have a physio and, support crew stuff. But I don't understand why they don't have engineers from the factory there, like getting real-time relay back from the rider and their mechanic to the engineer, because that's exactly what you've got in Supercross. Like, you've got engineers from Japan, like, Japanese engineers from Yamaha or whatever coming to Anaheim 1 and having sit-down meetings with the team and the riders and their mechanics and whatever, feeding that back, like, how can we make this bike better to provide factory parts and whatever. Some teams might have that ability on the World Cup circuit, but certainly not to the extent of, those other sports. But I guess what I'm saying is, it wouldn't surprise me when the sport gets to the point where you've actually got an engineer there for one of the teams.
Especially when you can, fairly easily have different linkages and that kind of stuff. Even for the big brands, there's enough stuff that you can do with the bikes. I think, like, the click adjustments, and you hear it on, like, the dialed series, it's like people are accommodating for track changes, whether it be gradient or speed or roughness. And, well, maybe not roughness, because roughness is suspension, but they're accommodating for, like, ride height with suspension some of the times as well. And you're like, well, maybe we could have just changed the ride height and then leave the suspension running in a totally different way. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And, like, that a lot.
For sure. And I was thinking about even this morning is that, and this is like a shout out to all the all the mechanics out there, like on the World Cup, but like the mechanics in downhill World Cup are doing so much of the heavy lifting. Like, if you ever want to meet a good mechanic, like not just in bike sense, but like just a good all-round mechanic, meet some of the World Cup downhill mechanics, because they're doing the job of what engineers would be doing in like motocross.
Oh, dude.
You know, those guys know their shit far more than what mechanics of other sports do.
The stuff that Peltari does is crazy. Like the depths that him and Troy go to with stuff, and you know, not to let cats out of the bag and not to talk about it too much, but like they do some gnarly testing and they go into so much detail, which is, I feel stuff that's on that brand level. And I suppose, you know, they are employed by the brand per se, but you know, they do a lot of stuff when it comes down to like spoke tensions and that kind of stuff. It's getting pretty gnarly, you know what I mean? To test it, not to just to do it, to actually test it.
Yeah, he is an encyclopedia of knowledge when it comes to anything to do with bikes, like racing anyway. I mean, maybe he can't tune a 7-speed Shimano derailleur on a kid's bike, but
it doesn't matter.
No, he doesn't need to do that.
Yeah. Make Troy go fast. Done.
Exactly.
You're right. I've never I've never thought about it that way. Like they do so much more than what they are meant to be. Really, as just a mechanic. You know, the stuff you hear Lyle and stuff talking about in the podcast, you're just like, like now I think about it, it's so much. Like, but I'm really excited to see what Nico does. I think it's pretty cool. And because considering a lot of that came from the whole Isaac Levinson's bike, that's pretty sick too. You know what I mean? So I think
it's cool.
I think he'll run it.
Yeah, Isaac's a real nice dude.
Oh, really? Have you met him before?
I've talked to him. I don't know if I've ever met him in person. I can't remember that I have. But we communicate on Instagram a fair bit back and forth. And he's a real cool dude.
Yeah, that bike was sick. I was a big fan of that. Not aesthetically, but functionally. Like
I'm a big fan of anyone that has a crack at like what they. Yeah, like no one. I think everyone's got their right to their opinion of what they think will ride good, and I just have a lot of respect for people that are like, this is what I reckon rides good, this is what suits me, and this is what I'm going to build. I reckon that's cool.
I think even just psychologically, like, not to ramble on too much with this, but you know, with something like Nico's program, if you're able to create something that you know is the best thing, you know what I mean, like it's going to make you go better regardless.
But again, it comes back to that thing, like of course, there's like a base value of what might be the best for most people, but to kind of touch on what you were just saying then, Lachy, like it comes down, you know, psychologically and physically to what suits you too. Like, what do you feel comfortable on? Someone might have this bike that 90% of the population are like, that's the best bike. But the point is, like, if you don't feel comfortable on it, then it's not the best bike for you. So, you know, that's why I got a lot of respect for guys that do their own thing, whether it's, you know, making it in their shed or whatever. It's just, it's what they want to ride, which I think is real cool. Even like with what Remy's doing, you know, it's not everyone's cup of tea, but that's the point. It's not everyone's cup of tea. Like you're not grinding rails and stuff. So don't knock a 24-inch rear wheel if you're not doing what he's doing.
Stuff. Yeah. Like, I suppose you think about it with F1, right? Like, you can't go buy an F1 car. And I've always thought that's weird with cycling a little bit, especially with downhill mountain bikes, because bikes are made for the most part for the consumer, which is, you know, 95% of their market. That's not always the best thing. Like I've ridden bikes before where they've had fandangled hybrid suspension and stuff, which was terrible for racing, but awesome for punters. And I'm sure it's the same with some certain angles and adjustments and all that kind of stuff. It's just, you confuse people too much, you know what I mean? But for World Cups, people probably need it.
Yeah, almost think, and again,
I think there might have been some confusion with the UCI rule that the bike had to be manufactured within a certain time, but it doesn't apply to downhill.
Oh, really?
So I think there's some. I
hadn't thought about that. Yeah. Because on the road bikes, it's all a sticker.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it might even be deeper than. I think that well, certainly some rules have changed. And perhaps it might have been a rule but has been lifted or whatever. But like I even think say lifting the wheel size stipulation was a massive one. And it's such a small stipulation to have, but removing that just like opens the floodgates to new bike designs and whatever. And like, talking about like F1 stuff, I almost think F1 have pigeonholed themselves into a situation with regulations where they can never be a car on the road, because it's like they've pigeonholed themselves purely to a custom market. Like, you need a wing this wide, you need a splitter that wide, and you need this and that, the rest of it. Obviously, so McLaren or Mercedes-Benz or whatever just don't run away with it because they've got the biggest budget. But I think what makes downhill cool is having it open to guys trying different stuff, and I think that's what really breeds innovation. So I'm all about it.
Yeah, none of that UCR stuff must apply, because some of that stuff's gnarly. Like, you can't have. I remember with certain SRAM chain rings, the bigger one, they had to put the pro team, I think, to test them on the force rings first, because you can only run them for a year as a proto part before it had to be released or stopped, and then they put them on the red and then they release them.
That's what I remember the rule being too.
Oh, yeah. So, but I haven't seen any of that stuff for mountain biking.
They do some weird shit.
Yeah.
That's why your Wahoo's got that little screw on it. It's not as a retention. Your Wahoo computer.
Yeah.
And it's got the screw on it.
Yeah.
Because it's retained to the bike, it's now there's something to do with the bike's weight. So once you screw it on, it's exempt from a weight or something. Like, there's some weird rule there that tweaks it. Yeah.
I did not know that. That's really cool.
Yeah. It's kind of weird, but yeah.
You're right.
I've always looked at that being like, who needs their Garmin or why or whatever stuck on there? Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Well, my Wahoo's still on the top of my Maydena, so I would say I do. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
You couldn't track it on the live thing or anything, or?
No, it was gone.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Cool. Should we move on to what I use a lot of, and what we're going to talk about a lot today, but brakes. You guys keen?
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I like talking about brakes.
I'm not an expert on the topic as far as from a sort of a mechanical point of view, like Lachy will be, but yeah, more than happy to weigh in on the conversation.
I just researched products that obviously I didn't make, so I wouldn't say I'm an expert either, but I do like talking about brakes. It's interesting. I feel a lot of people, there's a lot of stuff people don't realize.
I just use them a lot, like a lot.
I've been using mine heaps, man. Fucking heaps at the moment. Yeah, even with the big rotors, heaps.
What brakes are you running, Mick? Just out of interest.
It depends on what bike. On my downhill bike, I'm running Saints. On my enduro bike, I'm running XTs. And on my dirt jumper, I'm actually just building a new dirt jumper at the moment, and I've got Dior's. So, I've always been a fan of Shimano brakes. As far as like the consumer that's, say, buying brakes, I think like functionality for price, I think it's hard to go past Shimano brakes. They're pretty good.
When's the last time you used a Shimano brake, Lachy, if ever?
I used to...
sorry, Lachy, that would have pissed you off.
I'm not pissed off, first and foremost. I'm completely biased, but I also love the fact there's different brands. I honestly think that's a good thing. Bikes wouldn't be where they were if there weren't different brands. And it's the same thing when I used to do Stu. There'd be mechanics sitting there and they have their arms crossed and they'd be all salty. They're like, I'm a Shimano rider. I'm like, that's awesome. Like, I'm just teaching you to fix stuff. So whatever works for you. And like, I think, mineral oil completely has its merits. Like, it takes way less to look after mineral oil because it doesn't gobble water. You know what I mean? There's potentially other issues, but it's same thing as the bike stuff. It just comes down to preference. You know what I mean? It's what you like, and if there's something that works for you, that's awesome. So, but the last time I ran a Shimano, I used to ride on a Trek team that ran Shimano, so it's not like I haven't used the stuff. The last time would have been when I worked for A&B doing some bike reviews. Okay. I had a set of XTs or something on one of those bikes. So, Yeah.
Mm.
I've still bled quite a few in my workshop lately. You can use RockShox syringes to bleed them, which is always fun. So yeah.
Carefully.
Carefully. Very careful. Always be careful.
Yeah, I've actually did a test last year where I ran Formula, Magura, Shimano, SRAM, and I feel like I'm forgetting one. That might have been it, actually. I was trying to get TRP, but man, they all stop so damn well these days, but they just have different feelings.
Mm.
So
I think a big part of it, and sorry, I hate to butt in there. That's a bit rude.
Go ahead.
Like, I think a big thing of it is like, in my personal opinion, like all brakes work good when they're new. What I really put a massive emphasis on for myself, like as a consumer, is what brake's going to work good after 12 months or 2 years or whatever. And like, I won't put any names next to it at all. But there are some brands of brakes that work really, really well. Don't get me wrong, but they just don't last. Whether that's with the internals or just the material that the external stuff is made out of. I just think that like, I haven't tested every brake. Like, of course, there are brakes out there that are probably really good. Like, I like what like Trick Stuff are doing and what they look really good. But for sure, like, yeah, Shimano and SRAM are pretty bloody good. I'll just say that from the outset.
Yeah, I think
I really wanted to try that. I really wanted to try that Trick Stuff brakes, but I like my liver. I didn't want to sell that on the black market to get those things.
I thought you were going to say you wanted to try that brake that was on Pink Bike that was the Franken brake just then.
No, I'm good.
Don't say that.
So anyway, my point was going to be, Darren, is that like a heap of like, bike magazines or whatever, like some of them obviously test very well, but I've seen a lot of brake reviews where they're like, oh, this works well, this doesn't, well, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, well, you did like 2 days in Whistler Bike Park, like ride them for 12 months every day and just thrash them and, see how long they last. Because I think that for me, like durability is just a huge thing with brakes. I don't want to be riding down a trail and be concerned that the brake's just going to fade away on me.
Yeah. I think brake, like just to expand on that too, I think brake servicing, like I joke that suspension servicing is underdone, but brake servicing is like really underdone because there's no like real service interval with them as well. So, like probably not for you or I or any of us here, but you go to events and you start bleeding a brake and just the death that starts coming out of the thing. You're just like, when's the last time you bled this? And they're like, oh, 2 years ago. And you're like, okay. Like that
100%.
servicing thing's a big factor.
And half the reason why I do love Shimano brakes so much is because they're so easy to service. Yeah. Like so easy. Yeah, pretty well, no matter where you go, someone's going to have mineral oil if you don't. But yeah, you can get away with a lot with Shimano brakes. Like I've never had them. I'm affiliated in no way with Shimano at all, but like I've never had a set. Sorry, I had a piston seize once, but other than that, yeah, I've really had no issues. Yeah, it hasn't been something I can fix immediately. So
I think and that being said too, like all brakes can have their issues. Like I'm not going to get into the SRAM issues too much because I don't work there anymore. I don't really want to put my foot in it. But when you're dealing with a lot of heat, a lot of moving and some quite tight tolerances, like there's always going to be some issues. It's the same with any product really. It just comes down to, for the most part, if they're they last long term. I think it's important.
And not servicing your brakes and giving them that bleed is going to exacerbate all those issues, right? Like, man, the amount of times I've just pulled out like someone's Shimano fluid and there's literally like chunks of shit just floating around in it.
Oh yeah, like the thing and the problem with the chunks is right. So the way, and I don't know the way that the gland sits on those, but when you pull most brakes, when you pull the brake in, the the pads go out because the pistons move. And then what allows that piston to move is there's a seal and there's a little gland that's extra bit of space, and it flexes into the gland, and then it pulls back from the flex in the seal, not the lever. If you've got chunks flying around in there and they end up in the gland, then your pads stop retracting and pulling back properly. You know what I mean? So that's a whole other factor in the not bleeding and thing, is you'll start to fill that gland up with stuff. Shimano won't fill up with, it won't get water and stuff. It'll get water down there. But dot can get thick and really thicken up in there as well if there's water and stuff in that, because it'll drink it up. So servicing is key. And then like the calipers always at the bottom of the bike, right? So if there is any debris, that debris is always going to end up in the caliper. So it's always think it's important to flush from the top, no matter what brake system you're using, to get all of that crap out of the caliper and then bleed.
Yeah, I don't think that flush step is used enough. Like a lot of people just keep doing that lever bleed, like especially with Shimano, because it's so easy.
Yeah, you put the bucket on, that's a bleed. Like I've seen shops charge for that. They just chuck a bucket on, like it's good. And then like you actually check the fluid.
Flick the lever a couple of times.
Yeah. Because you don't see the depth coming out of it too much when you flick it a couple of times. You just see it's like one little tentacle comes up, and then you're like, oh, put the thing back on, fire it up, off you go. But yeah, that's not a bleed. That's just getting air out of the system.
Tentacle of death. I love it.
Yeah. I don't know if Shimano's got like a bleed time frame for their brakes. Like I don't know how often you're meant to change the fluid, but
I'm not sure.
Every month, right?
It turns out you use it.
I think the other thing too is with brakes, like, I don't know, it sounds obvious, but I don't think it is obvious to a lot of people. But what you're riding, like the terrain that you're riding, alters your service interval so much. Hey, like, if you're riding a lot of vertical over a very short period of time, like if you go to Whistler for, I mean, you guys know, well, put it this way, like Maydena early last year, I was surprised because I hadn't ridden a lot of vertical in a while because of coronavirus and whatnot. Like I was just surprised with how fast I was going through pads. Like I rang Dave Habich and I'm like, dude, can you chuck, because he was coming down a couple of days later, I'm like, can you chuck in some spare pads? Because I took pads, but I'd burnt through a heap of them just because, of how much elevation. So it's all that thing. Like I don't think it's a linear scale with how much extra riding you're doing. It's logarithmic for sure. Like if you're riding big elevation, you're always on it and you're getting a lot of dirt in there and you're really heating those things up, then your service interval comes down a lot.
Yeah, well, anytime you get the fluid close to at that boiling point, it drops the boiling point as well, and it will it'll progressively get hotter and hotter the more you leave them on. So the more vertical you have, especially in Maydena, there's no time in which you really get off the brakes a lot to let them cool down considerably as well. So even when they're touching the pad and rotor, like they're touching at a higher temp, which is going to wear them faster as well. Madena's crazy how quick you can go through pads. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think organic have a right to be at that bike park at all. Sintered is the way to go. I think they're rain, hail, or shine.
Yeah. Well.
Well, you rode that
for sure.
You rode that dust here when you rode Fox when you were here, didn't you, Mick? And you saw how fine like that dust is, and the same with like
it's still on my bike.
Yeah, like that stuff gets
it's still.
It gets in everything as well. Like that's the other thing, is it gets in your piston and around the seals, and every time you press your brake, it's just destroying like those seals and stuff. So you would see Shimano seals and I think SRAM just destroyed.
And I think that's part of like, and again, like I don't want to sound like a pessimist in regards to like smaller boutique brake brands, because I'm really not. Like I'm a big fan of a heap of brake brands. Like I've tried Magura, I'm a fan of them. But I'm all for people, any brand making brakes and giving it a crack. But one of the reasons why I've always kind of gravitated towards one of the bigger brands for brakes is really just for the servicing and replacement stuff if anything goes wrong. Because it's one of those things, like let's say if you've got a riding trip planned or whatever and something goes wrong with your brakes, if you can't fix it, then it's really not a good time. Like, it's one of those things that you really up the shit with. So yeah, it's one of those things that I've always been, I guess, wary about putting on my bike, because like I want to be able to service it or know that I can get a spare part if need be, just because I know how detrimental it can be if something goes wrong and you can't fix it.
I see it all the time at events. You know, someone's got a whatever, not to name names, but a whatever break, and they just can't get spares, or it's Maydena, and I've seen it all the time too. And they can't get pads because they, same as you, they've gone down. They haven't taken spares because they're like, oh, I haven't ridden something this steep for this long. And I think access to spares is so critical with brakes, whether it be rotors or pads or brake lines. You know what I mean? Like, it happens. I think it's pretty key.
I also think, for sure, and I also think the nature of the mechanics of a brake is like they either work or they don't. There's no middle ground. Like, some things you can get away with being like, oh, it's not perfect, but it's going to see me out the weekend or whatever. Whereas a brake is like, there's a fine line there between perfect and then just ruining your whole
Oh
trip.
yeah.
So,
if you don't have the confidence to stop, you're having a shit time, straight up. You know what I mean? And I think that comes back to, it also comes back to servicing. Like, this, again, at events, you see people with this black fluid in their brakes. Like, if you're going to spend all this money to go whatever race or ride, whatever it is, get your brakes bled before you go. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's so critical to having a good time. The last thing is you want to get there and then just haven't done some standard maintenance and just can't stop. Like, it's not inspiring. You just get shitty. Like,
I mean, if you're going to run like those boutique brands, like I run the Maguras because they are what I get on with best 99% of the time. And I've got a couple of spare sets of pads. I've got a spare hose and I've got spares like that I'll just take with me wherever I need to go, because I know for a fact that not many people are going to have that. Definitely not Maydena.
have you heard about the Shugura?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that thing's...
You have heard about the Shugura?
I got very upset with that break.
I have seen it. Yeah.
That was the scariest thing I've ever seen.
Apparently there's a fair few like Euros and whatever that run Shuguras. For people who don't know, Shimano leave a Magura caliper.
Heaps of people here on e-bikes have them, especially on Specialized, because they get the Magura brakes on Specialized and they don't like the lever, so they just swap the lever out.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I'm so not into that. It's the same thing I said on Drivetrain. Like, these are systems that are made for a reason, and they're made together to work.
OCD is getting to you, isn't it?
Well, it's not like...
No, I'm just...
It is a little bit OCD, but it's just like, say that brake fails. You can't go to anyone to help you. You know what I mean? Like, you can't go to Shimano because they'll tell you to fuck off. And you can't go to Magura because they'll tell you to fuck off. And if it's, SRAM rotors and they've got some problem, like, no one's going to help you there, which goes back to the same thing on support, right? Like, you've got nothing to help you there. Like, if you bust a piston seal, you're buying your caliper or you're buying your seal. If you bust a lever, buying your lever. Like, you're not going to get any love from anyone. But then, like, I don't know, I just feel there's longevity things and there's things that you don't know with that if it's going to work. And especially with brakes, like, I don't want to find that out the point that it stops working, because the point it stops working is when you're going to eat shit, you know what I mean? So, like, there's a whole bunch of mixed match stuff that people can run, and there's whole different levels of my OCD, but I feel with brakes, it's just like, nah, like, if you put a Shimano chain on a SRAM drivetrain, it'll work for the most part, but it's probably not as nice as what it should be. But that's just like a feeling thing or a noise thing. It's not like a you not stopping thing.
And that's, I guess what my point was before, where brakes is like, there's some things that, like, there's a fairly broad grey area in the middle that you can get away with, but brakes is either it's perfect or it's not working at all. And if it's not working, you're going to have a real shit time.
Yeah. The best brake combo I ever saw was at Velofix, and it was a kid who used to cycle at the same school I used to cycle. His dad brought his bike, and his bike was flogged. Like, one of the cables had actually worn through the frame. It was like an S-Works Epic, just from, not cleaning the thing. But he had, I can't remember which way around it was. It was Shimano levers, Elixir calipers.
Oh, no.
So I was like, looked at the caliper.
What oil are you running?
Pads. Well, yeah, this was a funny thing, right? So looked at the pads, got pads out, went to go place pads. So I went to go bleed it because we had pads and bleed it, and I was like, got the SRAM kit out. All I looked at was caliper, and I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, it was amazing how they actually used like those cable clamp things, like the wire things that tighten it up. And I was just like, oh my God, they actually kind of worked, but obviously because the seals were so swollen. Like, so if you have a dot seal, which is EPDM seal, it'll react with mineral oil, regardless if there's been dot on it. If there's dot on it, it'll react worse. It'll swell. I used to have them at SRAM and I had all 4 pistons. You might have seen it in one of my stew ones, Darren. Like the one that was EPDM seal that had dot on it that then got left in mineral oil was like a little bit over double the size. It was crazy. So that's what happened in these caliper seals. So the brakes would push in, they just wouldn't retract at all. So you'd kind of pump them up and then they'd stick there and then they'd maybe jiggle back in a little bit. But that was the craziest combo I ever saw. Like, I couldn't believe they were riding that thing.
Wow.
Yeah. Like, it would have taken so much effort to get that to work. And everything would have been swollen. Even the lines swell, you know what I mean? Like, that reaction with the dot and the mineral swells in itself.
Don't you just put mineral in the lever and dot in the caliper and it's fine?
Well, they wouldn't technically mix, I suppose. The one's an oil, but yeah, like at SRAM, and not to put that in anyone in the shit with that, but like, no shops will be named, obviously, but I've seen a lot of mineral oil in dot brakes, like far more than you would think. And
that's surprising, particularly because it's got written on the top, dot fluid only.
Dot fluid only. And the funny thing is, like, that bleed kit's now dead because they're the same seals, right? So you've just given a bleed kit. But yeah, every
bleed
time
kit that also says dot fluid only.
Yeah, exactly.
On all the syringes. Yeah.
You pull back on the syringe and these little droplets of oil come out. You're just like, oh God, this thing's done. You know what I mean? And then you got to talk to the shop and it's always the same thing. Oh, it must have been someone else. And it may have been or it may not have been. But yeah, like quite regularly on that, it was pretty scary. Don't do that. They won't work. They will swell everything and you'll have to replace everything. Yeah.
That's dot 5.1.
Yeah, not dot 5 either. Dot 5 is for, I think, Brembo and Harley brakes, and it's silicon based. Dot 5.1 and dot 4 are glycol ether based, which is what I was talking about with being hydroscopic. So that glycol ether will pull moisture in. Can I go on a bit of a fluid rant quickly?
Go for it, dude.
So
this is your time to shine, this podcast, mate.
There's
Part of why I picked it is so we could have one-on-one.
I hogged the last one and I felt,
that was good. I got so much out of the last one, actually. It was sick. I had a lot of brake stuff up at Ignition between these last two, so that's kind of why. But each to their own with what fluid you choose. I think it's totally fine. And I don't want to sound completely biased. But dot fluid, as I said, glycol ether based, that will draw moisture into it. So all brakes are going to deal with moisture in some way, shape, or form. The reason dot fluid is chosen, at least from SRAM or dot fluid companies, is it has quite a high boiling point, and then the water will mix into the fluid. So a typical dry boiling point for a good quality fluid is like 230 up to 250 degrees. And at a wet level, which is over a year-old fluid, which has about 3% water content, it goes down to about 160, 170. It can get a bit more saturated with water than that, but it doesn't really go crazy more. But that's also why you need to bleed your brakes at a minimum once per year to get rid of that old fluid that's got 3% water content or more. The mixing in with water is important. It will over time, and I'm sure you guys have used SRAM brakes before, or dot fluid brakes, and it's been sitting in the shed and the brakes are pumped up. And it's just because there's more volume in that fluid than what there was when it was first bled, and that's why they kind of fill up and you bleed them and they go back to being good. In contrast, if you've got an oil in a brake, water will still get in. That water is denser than the oil, so it'll flow down to the lowest part of the brake, which is usually the caliper and usually the hottest part, and that's where you can get a boiling of that water, and potentially issues with pistons, all that kind of stuff as well. That being said, with mineral oil, there's far less water that will get through. It doesn't need to have that minimum bleed once per year because it doesn't get a water content naturally through sucking the moisture through the lines and through the brake. But seals aren't always perfect, and especially around the calipers, you will get moisture in there inherently at some point. So it's kind of why there's the two camps of fluid. With them, mineral oils are usually about a 170 to 180 boiling point, so they'll naturally be lower as well. And then the seals you can use with both are what's different, and that's where you can get a really grossly different brake feel, especially in the return of the rubbers. So mineral oil will run an NBA or I think it's a Buna nitrile seal, and the elasticity, can't say that word, of those is grossly different to what you get with EPDM. So especially once it's mixed with mineral oil, it's a little bit slower in the way it'll can retract back at times. Right. And that's why you can get instances, especially when pads are quite worn on again, not just name names, but on mineral oil brakes, where there can be a slightly different bite point changing because the elastics aren't moving back as quickly as what others can. And then what you find with DOT is it's quite a snappy rubber with EPDM, so that will snap back a little bit more. So generally speaking, I find with DOT brakes, no matter what the brand, it's usually a bit more of a snappier feel naturally without having to have a linkage, and especially over a lot of on-off braking and a lot of heat. Whereas you can find with those nitrile-based seals, it can be a little bit slower. So it's kind of where with brakes, there's multiple different things to choose from. You can have fluids that require less maintenance, which I, again, can completely see benefits with. And there's ones that, and with that more, lack of maintenance, there may be some other downsides. Other brake fluids, which are DOT, you're going to have a higher boiling point, but it's going to require more maintenance. And it's playing with what you want. If your thing of the bike sits in the shed and you jump on it every so often and not all the time, probably a mineral oil brake's going to be better for you. And it shocks me to say that, being the DOT tram guy. But, you got to suit the thing that works for you. Same with commuters and stuff. I feel for commuter bikes, mineral oil is better for them. They just ride the things all the time, and the maintenance is usually minimal, at least in Sydney. But, people want a bit more performance. They may get more benefits out of a DOT fluid-based system. So it's kind of my brake rant. But there are reasons why as well interesting. They'll work differently. There's reasons why they need more servicing. And, there's a reason why stuff swells as well. As I said, any oil that you put onto a DOT fluid seal, regardless of if it's got DOT or not, it will swell, and it will swell dramatically. And the one pet hate I see, and I heard it all the time in stew class, is pistons are sticky moving them back when you move your pistons back because you're changing your pads. So people spray it out with like TF2 or a petroleum-based spray. That will swell those piston seals. It won't get a ton of fluid in there, like they're pretty tight tolerance, but it will get in over time and it'll swell them. So, and I've seen it time and time again where someone got their brake pads changed for an event, so they've done the right thing, and then their brakes are just going all weekend. And it's because those piston seals have been swollen because someone's lubricated them with the wrong lubricant. For the most part, with DOT fluid, you shouldn't really grease them at all. There is greases that are made, but they're not. The greases aren't perfect for that if you don't know what you're doing. They're usually made for assembling. But same with levers and stuff. Like, don't spray your levers out with anything. Even if it's not an oil-based lubricant, some of the additives from the aerosol will also contaminate DOT seals, which is important. So I think for the most part to be honest, even with Shimano, just don't spray them with anything. Shimano, I think, I don't know, you probably know Darren more than me, they used to suggest you could just lubricate pistons with the mineral oil itself. And that was quite nice when you're doing the gravity bleed, because you'd have a whole bunch of it in your rag anyway. And that would kind of do its thing at the same time. But I'd really steer clear of spraying anything in a caliper or a lever. That's my big rant.
On the SRAM point, just to I don't know, give a props to SRAM, because I was running SRAM for a while a couple of years ago, and I was in Europe, and actually I needed to push my pads apart, like I need to push the pistons back, and had my So this was at Leogang. So I had kind of like limited tools. I had the pads, I had the old pads in there, and I was trying to push the pistons back with a screwdriver, and I slipped, and the pad slipped out, and I chipped the corner of the piston, and it like literally cracked in half. And I was like, oh no, this is like bad news. And I went to SRAM.
Yeah.
And I've forgotten the guy's name now. I remember, like, I know his face. I
Dawson
can't remember his name.
or
One of the Euro.
Oh, Martin. Was he full Euro accent?
Oh yeah. Hey, sorry.
Full Euro accent.
Yeah, I think he's German. He's probably a couple of years older than me. Like he's a younger guy. Like blonde, short hair. Can't remember his name. Anyway, I bought him some beers and he was stoked. But yeah, he replaced the piston. He's like, oh yeah, no worries. Just leave it with me. And like half an hour later, like whole new piston. And I was like stoked. So on that point, yeah, I want to give props to SRAM there because it really helped me have a pickle a while ago.
That's how I first started.
Talked about Shimano for 10 minutes at the start. But yeah, I'm a big fan of SRAM and their brakes just from that one. Yeah, from that one bit, it was cool.
There's so many spares, and I'm not going to stand here and be the SRAM ad guy for much longer, but there's so many spare parts, and the spare parts catalog has so much stuff in it, and you can, usually pretty much every little part you can replace, especially in brakes. So if you need pistons or piston seal kits, they exist. The SRAM support at races, like that's how I first started running SRAM. I actually had some issues with some Shimano brakes and bought some SRAM brakes off the race truck, and then kind of just got to know them from the years after that. But that race support is epic, man. Like,
well, it is, and like that's when I think, yeah, like when I was racing for a couple of seasons, like pretty hard. Yeah, I was SRAM most of the time. The only reason I switched to Shimano, because I was just buying stuff off the shelf, obviously. The only reason I switched to Shimano was actually like midway through a season because I was using parts. I was using parts for multiple bikes. And one of the guys I was pitting with, Jack Redding from the UK, he was sponsored by Shimano. And he's like, dude, what the fuck are you doing? You swapping cranks. And I'm like, yeah, dude, I'm a privateer. Like, what do you expect? Like it cuts down the baggage fee because I don't have to fly with multiple sets of cranks. I'll just swap them between bikes. And he's like, fuck, man. Like, go chat to Bass from Shimano. Went to chat to him and he hooked me up with a new set of cranks, which I thought was like, as a privateer, that was like
huge.
I couldn't believe it. Oh man, like, anyway, and then I went up for track walk and then came back for a track walk, and we came back and in the foyer of Jack's tent was like a couple of Shimano bags with a full Shimano kit out for a whole bike. Like I'm talking brakes. Well, I already had the cranks obviously, but like brakes, everything you could think of, and like chain, cassette,
far out,
derailleur, everything, and multiple spare parts, like a couple of chains. I had 4 discs, like the works, dude. I almost cried.
That's so sick.
For a privateer,
I would have cried 100%. Yeah.
So from that point on, I've always just ran Shimano because, well, those Saints are still on my downhill bike because I don't ride my downhill bike that often, so they're pretty well brand new. But like, I've always just kind of ran them from that point on because they helped me out. But like, yeah, I've always been a SRAM or Shimano fan because they've always been good. They've never really let me down. So.
I think it's pretty. It's a big influence onto what people like. I won't run Shimano parts because I just don't have the support here. And like, if I need SRAM stuff,
I think that's a huge part of it, dude.
And like, if anyone from Shimano is listening, when you have stock and you want to sell more of it, go to more races. It'll be sick.
The support thing's massive, right? And like, I don't work at SRAM anymore, but like like Dylan and Hayden and like all the guys have set up there is amazing. And that race support is amazing. And it is biased in what I'm saying, but it's kind of not at the same time. Like if you go to a race and you run SRAM, you'll get looked after.
100%.
It's pretty amazing. And it's those experiences that is what, creates brand loyalty. And yeah, part of that is in some ways a marketing thing. But I think it's super important, and that's why, like when I started Green to Gold, we went with SRAM Rock Shop because we could get the support, and we could get the support overseas. And for me, trying to be home chef, manager, and mechanic, you know what I mean, it saved me a shitload of time just being like, here's a whole bunch of forks and shocks. Thank you. Which is massive. But yeah, that SRAM support like is in Australia, I think is just second to none. Like it's
I agree. Like I would even go it like on a limb, and like again, it could be off the market, but like I think the SRAM loyalty for Aussies is huge. Like you see any Aussie that's doing well at the moment, probably other than Dean Lucas, they're all, and he was previously SRAM, like, but like, SRAM loyalty in Australia is huge for sure. And I think like their support about just getting up and coming riders from Australia, you know, supporting them like here, but also supporting them when they go overseas is huge. So actually, props to SRAM.
I have to say, just to give props to someone else, and I can't remember the guy's name, and I do apologize because I know he listens to the podcast. The guy who heads up Mckillop in Oz, he is a champ. He led a guy I know's break that wasn't a Mckillop break, it was a Shimano break. He sorted the break out for him up at Ignition. Like he's always at those events, and he puts in real well as well. I do have to say
that's awesome. Well, that's how. Yeah, that's also how we got our set of Mckillops as well for the Trinity was through Andy. So props to Andy. He's a good dude. I haven't spent enough time on him to really give a good review, but from what I've ridden on them, they've been good.
I rate them highly, and I guess again going back to that support thing is he's very, very quick at replying to people and getting people's questions answered. So not because I dealt with him from customer perspective as well, but again, it comes down to that support. Is if I have a customer that's got an issue with their Mckillop brakes and I need to find out what the hell's wrong with them, I just message Andy and then he can tell me the thing, like what's wrong. He's so knowledgeable, and it just makes life so much easier.
It looks like he's got stock too, which is pretty key. I think it was like Lucy down at Maydena put up a story the other day of like a whole box of pads. I was like, you're going to need those. But it's like clearly they got stock too, which is good.
Heaps of stock. Yeah. Do you have any preferences so do you run your brake levers close to the bar or far from the bar? And do you have like a lot of throw? Do you have preferences in how you run your brakes?
I don't really know what far would be, but I've now got a measurement for mine because I've just been tinkering with the new bike and chucked some new bars on it today. But from the flange of the death grip, it's 52 mil away to the clamp of the brake. So I feel it's quite far in compared to a lot of people.
Are you talking about the clamp on the bar away from the
flange of the grip? So it's about much.
Yep.
So the tip of the lever is like pretty much bang on in line with the flange. So I kind of have them, so my hand ends up being like angled in a little bit, so I can kind of get my seagull on just a touch, like not a lot, but just a touch.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And then because my finger's still fucked from a couple months ago, my left brake engages, my rear brake engages quite far away from the bar now, but I used to have them engaged quite close, so it would reduce arm pump on them.
Your brakes are 52 mils inboard from your
That's
grip.
Huge.
Yeah.
That's why I asked the question, like, where are you measuring from? Because that's fucking huge, man.
I'll get them out. Maybe I'm not wording this right. Let me grab the bike out. Hold up.
I didn't even know SRAM levers were that long.
No, it's not.
I'd just go to reach and I just wouldn't be getting the lever.
No, I think I'm just wording this weird. It doesn't look that weird.
Well, I measured Tommy's today. Tommy, Tubular Tommy from FTM T-shirts, little plug.
Oh yeah.
His were 25 mil. So you're like double.
Fuck! I'm not gonna be able to show you guys. This is gonna be a struggle.
That's a fair way in. I can see it.
I don't know. Can you see it? Yeah, like that's like it's like three.
Oh my
fingers.
god!
Yeah. That's huge.
Yeah, but I also run. I run my grip I don't have it all the way out here. Like I have my grip
Yeah,
a little
because
bit apart.
I kind of am. Like I run my hand pretty well on the end of the grip. So yeah, you're right. Probably gives you another 15 mil.
Yeah, but you can see my finger kind of comes out just touch, but then I can like get my full seagull on. Yeah.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, I used to run for years. It was always 2 fingers was the gap, and I've probably changed that in the last like.
I thought you were going to
18
say
months.
2 fingers on the brake lever. I was like,
No. Speaking of brakes, and I only just remember this. I remember reading a review once from who's the guy who used to work for Dirt, the real ranty dude. Alan
Mike?
or,
Nah.
I'll think of his name. Anyway, he used to work at Dirt, real ranty, had very strong opinions about things. And it was when the XTRs came out, or the Saints, and was pretty much bad-mouthing the lever design. And then it was like editor's note. Oh, it was Steve something. Steve brakes with his inside finger. I was just the whole brake review. I just pretty much threw the magazine up. I was like, I'm not reading this rubbish. Like,
I reckon people like it could be totally separate. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not drawing a correlation, but I remember a heap of like in like moto guys, because Ricky Carmichael used to do that on his clutch hand. So he used his middle finger on the clutch.
Yeah, okay.
And there was a lot of moto guys that picked that up around the same era. And probably still do. I'm not really sure. But yeah, look at any Carmichael picture and his clutch hands he's using there. And I think sometimes it was like an indexer. So sometimes he'd reach with 2, but a lot of the time he'd just use the big one.
Yeah, okay.
So
yeah, anyway.
Steve.
So maybe he was onto something if Carmichael did it.
Yeah, for your clutch. If you can get your clutch to work better on your push bike with your middle finger, that's awesome.
Yeah, but that was also pre-hydraulic clutches, so you probably needed, the most leverage you could get on it better.
A friend of mine down here, Steve Marsh, used to race nationals downhill and do nationals observed trials in the same weekend. And he'd get so much brake prompt from the observed trials, he'd have to brake with his middle finger in the downhill because his index fingers basically didn't work anymore.
Well, that's kind of fair enough.
Funny.
Like, I feel that's a bit justified. Like, old mate's having a crack. But like, I feel as a way to actually brake normally, that's kind of like he's just improvising, adapting, and overcoming, right? But as an actual way to brake with the middle finger it's not good. I haven't seen many people do the 2-finger brake in a while though either.
I don't know if I've ever done 2-finger brake other than like shitting myself dirt jumping and I've grabbed a fistful, but I don't think I've ever 2-finger braked.
No, I don't think I have either. Your brakes should be strong enough to pull you up with one.
For sure.
Should.
Yeah, I totally understand the argument about having the contact close to the bar for arm pump. Totally understand it. And I think the guys that do it are doing it for a good reason. I've never done it. Maybe it's a BMXer thing and I've just never got used to it. I really don't know. I've always just been scared of getting brake fade and the lever hitting the bar and not having anything. That just scares the shit out of me. Like, don't get me wrong, like my contact isn't all the way out. It's probably like, at a guess, I reckon the contact is like midway through the stroke.
Yeah.
But it's in no way close to the bar. If anything, I'd rather have the contact way out than way in, if anything.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Maybe, like I said, I think it's like the back of my mind just being shit scared of getting brake fade and it touching the bar and having nothing.
Well, the other thing with it too is when you do run them real close, if there's not a lot of throw with them, so when your pads wear, it's a piggyback in the fluid that pushes extra fluid in and puts your pad back in the right place. But if you're not getting enough force going through the brake, and I see this on road brakes all the time, it doesn't advance the pistons properly as well. So it might not even be fade and starts pulling to the bar. You just want a bit of pad off. I only used to do the really close thing when I used to race because I raced a lot. I'd get a lot of arm pump, whereas now I don't really probably ride enough to, or have to do a run long enough to actually get arm pump anymore. So that's why I run it out a bit more. But like Troy and Connor both run their brakes super, super close. Connor probably more so than Troy.
Those are disgusting.
But they're racing all the time as well. So they've, obviously any fatigue in their arms is big. But they also have a few little tricks that I don't really want to talk about because people will blow their brakes up to get them working like that as well. And it's also a bike that's touched a lot, right? Like they've got a mechanic that checks them out every run. So
that's right. They know their brakes are always going to work. And then I think the other thing too is that has a little bit to do with it. I mean, those guys are best in the world. So,
what are you trying to say, Mick? What are you trying to say?
what I'm trying to say is like people that ride their brakes all the time.
Yeah.
I think like if you're riding the brakes the whole way down the track, I guess you've got a prevalence to want the contact all the way out, so they're there. Whereas if you're off the brakes a lot and you just know where that contact point is, you're confident. Like they're going to be so confident in their own skill that they grab the brake, they know it's there.
Yeah, those guys have a lot of time to let their brakes cool down when they're going quick. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Whereas like me at Maydena, not really the case. It's just a lot of brake on for a lot of time. That power meter Quark made for the rotors a few years ago that Elliot was using to like fine tune a rotor, that was super interesting. And I was so hoping that was something that would come out, like to teach people better.
I actually never knew about that technology.
Oh, dude, there's a rabbit hole in that.
Cool.
Like it was just a power meter spider. I saw one when I was in Colorado. It's just a power meter spider with 6-bolt instead of the 8-bolt. I don't even know if it was a different carrier. I think it may have literally just been a power meter and then the brake track was put on it. But he was could just see how much he was dragging the brakes. You know what I mean? It really helped him tidy up that run. Did he win at Crankworks that year or get a good result? I'm pretty sure too. Like I think he went really well.
Who was it? Sorry,
Elliot Jackson. Yeah, he did a full blog on it. It was a really cool blog.
Was this when he was with Giant? Or
Giant.
Yeah,
it was.
That's real cool because I know. Yeah, and like everyone would probably know this, but it's so true. I mean, when you're riding good, when you're on the brakes, you're on the brakes hard, but then you're just not on the brakes. But if you're not riding good, you're just slipping them the whole time.
Yeah.
So I think
Safety
that's my
blanket.
point about I think that's my point about really good riders. You use the example of like Troy and Connor or whatever, is that they're either on or they're off. Whereas if you're dragging them the whole time, I don't really know, but I would say that you're probably more prevalent to wanting them further out. So you just, got that bite point all the way up. But
they're probably trying to brake as little as possible on a track, whereas we're all trying to get down safely. I think that makes a lot of sense. You want that confidence in the brake being there. Yeah.
That's actually how I ended up running my brake levers closer, the contact point closer. It's because I wanted to stop fading it. So I had excessive lever throw and the bite point really close in. So my fingers are in the same position. The levers are in the same position, but the brakes weren't working.
Yeah. Okay. I do that with my front brake, especially when I went to 220s because the front would tuck. So I ended up having that one further in, and then I would brake less because I would pull it the same amount as the back brake.
That's one thing I can't. I really struggle. Well, not really struggle with. I can do it, but I'm very picky about it. Is that like the contact point of left and right for me have to be very similar. Otherwise, it just throws me.
Yeah, I used to be exactly the same. I think that's what helps me because I still think it should be that way, so that it won't pull the brake on too much.
Yeah. I get what you mean.
But if I'm building a bike, it's like critical. Like if I'm testing it, they've got to be exactly the same, like road, mountain, whatever it is.
Yeah. I know this isn't a BMX podcast, but I think it's funny. Like we'll touch on it just real quick. But I remember I was young, like I would have been like 19 or whatever. I started working with a BMX coach, and I used to always ride with one finger on the brake. But I'd also do a gate start with one finger on the brake. I remember being like, "What the fuck are you doing a gate start with one finger on the brake for?" I'm like, "I just ride with one finger on the brake." He's like, "Yeah, but you're not going to touch your brake." I remember he's like, word for word, he's like, "Name me a BMX rider that's ever won a race and touched the brake." Because BMX, it's like if you touch the brake, you last. And I'm like, yeah, good point.
I was at a BMX event on Monday, which was weird because it was a Monday. It was a sick event.
Track Attack?
So Track Attack's on, and then it's the BSX race they do like Shane's backyard. It was a sick event. I'd never been to it or seen it, but I was noticing
they should open it up. they should open up to dirt jumpers because they would kill it.
I was looking at it. I was
Like,
like,
as far as
my
the
dirt
event.
jumper, and then the guy was like, "It's BMX only." And I was like, but yeah, I was watching all the kids in the start gate, and I was looking at it, and none of them had their hands on the brakes, and I was like, "What the hell?" And I was like, "Well, you don't really want to pull your brake in the start gate because you'll eat shit, right?" But yeah, none of them touched it the whole laps. Like it was just like bin it or go hard into the corners. It was gnarly.
The bottom of the hill, like the kink, that was the cue for me. And like I did it subconsciously, but I just think like because you pump for the kink, it was just like my finger would just transition to the lever, like just to rest on it at the kink, because I was never comfortable riding the whole track without the braking in case I was going to loop out or something. But what is funny now, and again, I don't want to make it a BMX podcast, but what is funny now is like disc brakes. Disc brakes kind of had a fad, a very shallow fad in the early 2000s. But then kind of died, like didn't hang around long. But disc brakes have come back now big time.
There's a few people with them, actually.
Yeah. And well, I'm not going to shit on it because, like, you know, it's all personal preference and whatever. And, like, don't get me wrong, disc brakes on a BMX, I think makes sense. And I'd probably run a disc brake if I was getting back into BMX now. But what doesn't make sense is guys running like a full downhill 4-pot brake on a BMX.
Yeah, hell no.
Because it's so, like, what are you doing?
Well, you don't, like, you do want more. Like, all that's going to do is help you skid more. I had this conversation with someone on my dirt jump. I have a level on my dirt jump, which is just like the XC brake, real lightweight. And I'm like, well, I don't really have a whole bike that's going to get a whole bunch of traction when I stop anyway, because there's no rear suspension on it. So, and the wheel is either going to lock up or it's not, which it locks up pretty damn well. So I definitely don't need a 4-pot because it's going to lock up more quicker. Yeah.
Well, I think, like, there's a couple of things. Like, one is weight. Like, you just don't need the extra weight.
Yeah.
It's just excessive. But then second of all, like BMX racing I'm talking about here is like, when I think about any time that I did touch the brake, I didn't want it to lock up. I just wanted it to slip, because if it locked up, it would fuck me. I just wanted to like tap it in a manual or something just to slip it enough to bring it back down. But yeah, a 4-pot brake, I'd just be concerned that I was going to like.
I totally get that. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be shit myself. But anyway, each to their own.
Yeah, it was interesting. There's quite a few of them there, actually. Yeah. I feel you could do a lot more with the rims with disc, which I think would be important, but I could be completely irrelevant. But yeah.
Well, that brings up a point I had the other day. It was, I can't remember who it was, but they were talking about trials and how they still use those hydraulic rim brakes.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason was that would stop the rim, which would stop the tire, so there was no movement in the bike when they'd land down.
Yeah, okay.
Whereas if you use a disc, there's movement in the spokes and the wheel will twist when they land.
That makes sense.
Whereas if it's a rim, it's just dead stop every time.
Makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Which blew my mind. Like,
and
I
a lot
never
of them
thought.
Bleed their brakes with water.
Sorry?
A lot of those guys used to bleed their brakes with water because it didn't get hot. Those rim brakes don't get hot. They don't get heat like and a lot of the Maguras and stuff, even on the road bikes, they don't have a piggyback or a bladder because there's no, not a bladder, just a bladder. There's no fluid expansion because they don't get hot like a disc brake. So you can just bleed them with it depends on the brake brand, but yeah, a lot of guys used to like have them in the bathtub, and you just do like a what's the word? Not a vacuum bleed, like when you have it in liquid, an immersion bleed with them, and you can do the same with lots of different oils with them as well. But yeah, it's a semi-common thing, at least that I've seen.
Yeah, right.
Get thirsty mid-run. Take a bit of it. Let's take a sip.
Suckle from the bleed nipple.
That just shows how tired we're getting over here. We might move on to some listener questions. There was one that I wanted to mention about what you just said with your front brake tucking. I can't remember who it was, but someone mentioned like running a smaller rotor on the front and then a bigger on the rear.
Yes.
The Baxter setup.
The Baxter or the Troy setup. Troy was running it for a while, I think, too.
Yeah.
But Baxter created it.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I'm gonna stick up for Baxter.
Yeah, I think Troy got it from Baxter, didn't he?
Yeah, they watched my bike check of Maydena and stole it from there. Yeah.
I think Marshy had a talk about it a while ago too. They didn't run it on the setup, but why on earth the bigger disc brake is on the front is a norm. I still find weird because all of your weight is getting taken really on the rear disc. So if you want a bigger rotor, I feel it would be on the back of the bike to deal with the heat and manage the heat better. So there's a bit of a theory with that. I think what Baxter was getting and Troy was getting is especially with the 220s, like it's so bitey on the front, especially if you're cornering, you dab the brake, it can really tuck the front end in. And I've definitely experienced that myself. That's why I have the levers around the other way. But my OCD hurts me a lot when they're not matching. So I have them the same.
Yeah. I also think there's a bit to be said about the nature of the way, not just the weight, like you were saying, like obviously the weight distribution, but the nature in which you brake front and back. So with the front, I'll just say with my own riding anyway, or what I've observed from my own riding, is that the front, like on F1 or V8 supercars or whatever, they've got the graph down the bottom that's like brake, accelerator, whatever, and it slides along. I reckon that's really cool. I think what you'd find is operating your front brake, it's either on or it's off. Like there is no modulation there. Whereas the rear brake, you're slipping a lot. Like even if you're like scanning into a corner or whatever, like you might be, I think you'd be on the rear brake more often, but maybe not as hard. Whereas the front, you'd be on it less often, but when you're on it, like you're really on it. So I think like this is just totally speculating, but I think the rear brake might heat up more than the front due to the way in which you're using the brake.
I would say I use the front to modulate the back brake more. I lock up my back way more obviously than I lock up the front, hopefully.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel that like it's like the rear brake is in a lot of ways the anchor really at the back, and the front is that finesse and that that fine tune of how much you need to stop or get the front to tuck down or can't do that stuff as well.
Like I would definitely use my back brake way more than my front.
Yeah.
And so therefore, weight distribution aside, like for a heat management point of view, I'd rather the back to be a better heat manager than the front.
Yeah. And
like
that's what
I think. I was just thinking, like, if you were to, like, let's say you were to go to a mountain bike trail tomorrow, and you had to choose whether to take off your front or your back, I'd much rather take off my front.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
So I think that probably says it all in the 220 argument. Like if you want, like if it's too aggressive on the front, I can certainly see how it's more advantageous to have the bigger one on the back for heat management and modulation reasons.
Same thing. If you're going to brake traction on either wheel, you probably want to brake traction on the back wheel over the front wheel.
Definitely.
From the brake. So bigger brake at the back, I think makes more sense.
Yeah, 100%. That's why I run the bigger on the rear. It's heat modulation, like 100%. It's all it is. Yeah. I'm not a lightweight, so I use the rear a lot coming from a dirt jump background, so I never use front brakes. What are they for?
Yeah, so I mean, I personally for my own ride, I've never really thought about it too much. Like I'm just like, well, I've got Saints, but like I'm 203 front and back, so I've never really thought about it a lot. But for the guys that are thinking about it, like say like Troy and Baxter who are mixing it up, I certainly understand and see the value behind what they're doing.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think Baxter explained to me the best at first. I was like, it's kind of weird. But then I said I've always been on the notion of that I have no idea why the bigger rotors in the front in mountain bike. But yeah.
I think someone thought that it did 80% of your braking if you applied. So it was better to have a bigger rotor. But that's just the physics of it. I think if you applied even force on both brakes, then the front's 80% more effective or something like that.
I have seen that.
Well, obviously, I mean, if you were to do like, a weight force diagram just in a static lab or whatever, then obviously like you get front dip. So all your weight's going to go to the front. So like you want the big brake on the front from a purely theoretical point of view. Hence why like a moto's got a big brake on the front, because you've got so much dip when you put the brakes on. Like even if you just put the back brake on, just because you've got a slowing velocity, like you're going to have a lot of weight moving to the front. So having a brake on the front is going to do more for you. But the point is, like in a dynamic situation, that's great. But if you've only got a front brake in that scenario on a mountain bike, you're just going to go over the bars. So the whole thing's redundant.
Yeah, when you're the majority of the weight on the vehicle, which is a push bike versus a moto, you're the one who'll fly front. So,
yeah, exactly.
Cool. This one was from Hold It Flat Mitch. Opinions on lever angle in regards to performance and arm pump / fatigue.
That's a big one. There's so many different trends on that. Like Yoan does it probably the funniest way.
Because it retracts his testicles.
His third testicle, I just think it's really preference based. I do like to have my levers at an angle that when I'm descending, my hands are fairly like in a straight line. And because I've got little legs and a high front end, they do end up being closer to flat than they do all the way down. But, you see a lot of people I've seen, you know better about it than Mitch, a lot of BMX people, the brakes all the way down. That's how they kind of get used to riding. And if that's how you're good at riding, then, that's how you're good at riding. So it's pretty personal. But I personally like to have a fairly flat wrist when I'm descending, and I feel that's beneficial. But then if I did more trail riding or XC, it's shit because your hands you got a really bad angle when you're climbing. So it really comes down to what you do and how you do it, really, and what feels comfortable, I think.
I reckon mine's pretty neutral. I think I put a photo up the other day actually of me riding the Trinity, and I looked at the photo, I'm like, fuck, those levers are so far down. Because I think we just bolted up when it was in the stand, like, oh yeah, this'll do whatever, and we're just so excited to ride it. And I think I noticed it straight off because like looking at it, because I'm like, oh fuck, that's so far down. That's not how I normally ride it. But generally speaking, I reckon my lever position's pretty neutral. Like, it's not crazy up, it's not crazy down. I think it's pretty neutral. I remember I was doing a fair bit of moto a few years back now. Like at the track at Ride Park. And I remember a friend of mine that I was living with, he was like, dude, you got to have your levers up. You got to have your levers up. And literally his were like flat, like at 90 degrees from the bar. And he remember he's like, just try it. And we like flipped my levers up on the moto, and I couldn't even ride around it. I was like, no way. Like, this is fucked. But it worked for him. Like, he was a really good rider. Like, he just swung off it the whole time. So I think it's a lot to do with personal preference, but mine are certainly pretty neutral.
I took a photo. I don't think you can really see that. That's like the angle of mine. Like I wouldn't say they're extremely flat, but they're definitely closer to flat than they are down. But when I sit on the bike,
mine would be like. I reckon mine would be a tiny bit further down than yours, but nothing. Pretty close.
Yeah, it takes you ages to get that dialed.
I think it has a lot to do with. I think we talked about this a little while ago, but remember in Norco's like bike fitment setup book, how they even dove into the different body types. So you've got like ectomorph, mesomorph, and endomorph.
Yeah.
And how that would distribute the weight on the bike and how you might set up the suspension and all that. I even think that has a lot to do on even lever position.
Oh,
because if you're very squat on the bike, or if you're very aggressive and you're over the front, like if you're really aggressive and over the front, you get away with having quite a steep lever angle because your center of mass is going to be right over the front, So anyway, there is no perfect setup. I think that comes into it a lot.
And I see a lot of kids doing it's changing now. A lot of kids doing the Yoan thing and going full flat for a while there. I was just like, again, like I'm stoked with people playing with stuff, you know what I mean? And like, don't get me wrong, I love a good trend, giving it a crack, but don't feel you have to make that setup work because someone else is doing it. I think it's the biggest thing. Don't have a preconception of how you think it should feel. Like try it in its own merits and then assess where you're at before. because some people get real weird with that stuff and it could be detrimental to your riding. Same with bar width.
Yeah, I think my lever setup would ruin your OCD.
Because they're different angles, or
yeah, my right's flatter because of my
Oh, dude.
I'm okay with that. I can deal with that, especially if it's injury based. I'm totally fine with that.
Yeah, injury is a good excuse for it.
Yeah.
Other than that, I don't know.
right's flatter than the left.
It would trip my mind out.
If it was a road bike though, no, they're gonna be the same.
Oh no, they're the same every time. Like it's disgusting if they're wrong. Purely aesthetics, of course. There was a good one here. This was a quick one for Lachy. What's the difference between guide Rs and guide REs?
Oh, the guide thing's good. I'll quickly take 5 minutes to explain this. All of the SRAM have their own little acronyms. So I'll go through a whole list because it's kind of hard to explain that. So there's guide R, there's guide RS, there's guide RSC, and there's guide Ultimates, and there's guide REs. Okay. The R stands for purely reach adjust. So you can just change the lever position on the brake. And they're the most basic of levers. To be completely honest with you, I would only ever go for an RS or above. The R, so reach adjust, the S stands for swing link, and it's a little linkage that sits in the brake lever, and it makes them feel way, way better than just the standard plunger setup. They'll feel a lot snappier. They'll feel a bit closer to Shimano, and that was actually really what they mimicked the swing link off, was to make the levers feel more like Shimano on the showroom floor, which is when you think about it and everyone comes into your bike shop and they do the little brake check and then the shocky test, the guide Rs don't feel that great on the shop floor. RSC is those two plus contact point adjust, so it'll adjust where the brake engages in terms of the plunger moving in the lever. Ultimate is the RSC with all of the carbon and the titanium and the rainbow and the whatevers. And then the RE was a specific brake made for e-bikes. So it's got reach adjust and the E stands for e-bike, and they're a code caliper on an R lever. If you ever want those brakes to feel snappier than what they are at the lever, change the lever out to an RS or above, and those brakes feel tremendously different because of that little swing link in the lever. And they're a custom brake, really, just for e-bikes. Yeah, it's a big difference.
Yeah, a lot of heavier people that were on budgets that I know of or wanted a little bit more power jumped over to them because they're pretty good value for money, and you get a little bit extra power from those.
They were a really popular brake at World Cups for a while with privateers.
Yeah. Fucking oath. I had them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, did you?
Yeah, fucking oath. Because they came spec'd on, I don't know what year it would have been, like 2018, 2019 Common Self Supremes came spec'd with guide REs. Because as Lachy said, like they were the old code caliper.
Yeah.
And then what I did was I had a set of old guide RSC levers. So then I swapped the levers out. And I even think that in the infancy, like before the new code RSCs came out, that's exactly what Troy and that were running, was guide RSC levers on the old code caliper.
They were a sick breakdown because the old code levers were so bulky and big and
but the old code caliper was sick.
Yeah, that was a really popular
so I ran
for
that
a long time.
Yeah, no, I ran that setup for a bit. It was fucking sick.
I think Manar was running XT levers with Saint calipers last year.
Yeah, a few guys. I think Loic was running that for a while too. And I don't know what the science was behind that. I heard
a rumor.
Here you go.
No, you're right.
I say I know
which story is going to be more spicy.
A lot of the syndicate guys used to run the XTR levers that didn't have the servo wave, because servo wave has quite a bit of breakaway, like off the top. Like if you go and touch your servo wave brakes, it actually feels like it's solid. But then when you pull it normally, it goes away. I know a lot of them are running the inlines, but I don't think the XT had that. So.
Yeah, I heard a rumor, and I don't think it's correct. Like after, once we got to this point, like in hindsight, I don't think it's correct because I think it's just been too long. But I heard a rumor that people thought that like there was a new Saint on the way, and the way they were disguising the new Saint was branding it as an existing lower product.
That would
I'm
not
like, at the
surprise
time, I was
me
like-
at all because
I was like, plausible. But I think it's probably too far down the line for that to be the case now. But anyway, that was a rumor at the time.
I believe it. I've seen that happen a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
It's a good way to disguise it.
Yeah. Because obviously that is coming out at some point because they've had all the proto derailleurs. So I think that group's like 10 years old now. Like I ran that when I used to race years ago, and that was way too long ago.
Yeah.
I think it is legitimately 10 years old.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
I think
close to it.
yeah.
Well, the thing is, you see the predecessor, like you see a predecessor Saint now. It's like, whoa, that's old. So
yeah.
Yeah, on a penny farthing.
that is something that Shimano do well, though, is like they have like a trickle down effect with their stuff. Like, you know, whatever XTR is at the moment will be the next gen XT, and then it'll become SLX, whatever. So it's all, you know, like SLX is like top of the notch stuff that was just a couple of years old, which I kind of like. I think it keeps the spare parts stuff alive too. I think that's kind of cool.
Makes it way easier with the group. Same with like Z. Like I remember Z was a privateer choice for ages as well for the same reason. It's just, you know, a cheaper version of Saint.
Yep.
Then, one last question. Now I've lost it again because we got distracted. This one. Have you guys used any aftermarket pads like MTX, Galfer, or Trick Stuff, or even EBC? I remember they used to be popular way back in the day.
I have had EBC actually. I bought a set of brakes off Sick Line years ago. If anyone used to watch that, look at that website, their bike build. And I bought a set of Ultimate Codes, and they had EBC pads with Goodrich lines. They were pretty good. But going back to the brake system thing, like I'm not a fan of aftermarket pads at all. Like I hate to name names, but Triple B brake pads can die in a hole. Like those things are so bad. Like I've had so many of those rattle in brakes and all that kind of stuff. There was a specific brand that had a recall, probably 5 years ago now, because the pad was snapping off the rivets from the backing. You know what I mean? So I think my issue with aftermarket pads, and again with any brand, is I just don't think they go through as stringent testing and analysis of how that brake works with another brake system compared to the big brands. Like I would suggest against putting third-party pads in Shimano brakes just as much as I would with the SRAM brakes. So I haven't had a lot of experience with that because I don't like it, and I don't think they're good, and I don't think they're as optimum for that system. But hopefully you've had another experience, Nick. or Darren.
No, I'm in agreement. Like I was going to say gone the full circle. I haven't really gone the full circle because I've always ran just, you know, Shimano or like, you know, I've always ran the brand of pads to match the brand of brake. Other than a couple of times I tried last year, might have been the year before. No, I reckon it was last year. I experimented with ceramic pads. I've forgotten the brand now. Honestly, couldn't tell the difference. In all seriousness, I couldn't tell the difference, and they seemed to wear about the same. So, you know, they're like 3 times the price. So I was like, well, fuck this. If I can't really tell the difference, then I'm just going to run Shimano's. Yeah, I've experimented with a few. I've like as a sort of a subset of that question, I guess. Like I've mucked around a fair bit with like metallic versus sintered stuff just to like get a feel of it. I've probably experimented with that more than brand. Yeah, I don't know. All in all, I'd be a metallic fan. I reckon. Yeah, I don't know. Organic can be a little bit bitier, I reckon, like off the get go. But like for any gravity stuff, they just don't last. So metallic fan.
Metallics have they need a lot more heat to get them running, and that's why they can make a lot of noise. And that's why they're usually not spec'd OEM, because they're loud as all hell, especially if they're not getting hot. You know, so you kind of have to know what you're doing to have symptoms run, or just not get the shits if they're not hot. But I use both quite a bit, to be honest. Like, I I'll change them around. I think the key thing is if you're changing your pad compound, just make sure you change your rotor, because that pad compound will impregnate the rotor, and you won't get optimum braking.
Do you reckon
changing?
Do you reckon? Because I've thought about this before. Not that I've really experienced it, but do you reckon for someone that rides their bike not that often, I reckon that an organic pad could be better purely because the metallic pad and the metallic disc can get a bit of surface rust and it just not work. Like if you pull your bike out once a month, I feel as though the organics probably work better for you just because of the surface rust thing as well.
Yeah, I think organic pads are still really good. And I think for the average rider, I think organic pads are better, to be honest. I think you want that initial bite to be there all the time for newer riders, people don't ride as much, because you don't want that like, oh shit, my brakes aren't warmed up yet moment, which only takes a couple of seconds, but stiffen the arms up. But I don't know about Shimano, but I know unless it's a code brake, all sham pads come now, I think, are the semi organics, which are just a little bit denser than the full organics.
Yeah.
The power they call it.
Yeah, for sure. And then like the other thing to that, I guess, and again, it's kind of a subset, but like Shimano, like Ice Tech pads, I've only really ran them when they come with the brake. After that, I just run normal ones because the extra money for the fins. Yeah, it might be a little bit better, maybe in a lab environment or whatever, but I've never been able to tell. So,
Sham doesn't do it. I've run them in the past, like when I used to run the same stuff on the M820s. I think that stuff's kind of cool. You know what I mean? Like,
dude, I love it. Like for the cool factor, I don't want to throw them out. Like I want to keep those fins on for as long as I bloody can. But the point is, I just can't justify like the normal ones like a third the cost. And I'll just get them.
I'm sure it would make a difference, but again, you wouldn't feel it. But in a lab, it would. Like, there's more mass there, so it would cool down. It would cool down better because it would distribute the heat better. And it's got the fins. And someone told me once that the fins have a lot to do with actually allowing the gases to escape between the pad and the rotor as well. It's not just the air going into cord. It's also that. So.
The other thing is the material too, like having the fins out of aluminium and the backing plate being metal, like the aluminium is going to pull the heat out real nice. So like 100% there would be something to it. Whether you can feel that on the bike is another thing. Like I said, I'm a huge fan of them. I reckon they look sick and I don't want to throw them out, but
it'd be interesting if you went through less rotors or put your rotors through less thermal shock with them. I reckon that's maybe the one thing you could measure would be that wear of the rotor, I reckon.
I guess my thinking, that would be a good one. My thinking of it was because I when I first was getting on Shimano, I used to buy the finned ones. And then my thinking of it was like, if there's guys riding codes and like obviously SRAM don't offer a finned pad, if there are guys running SRAM brakes that are winning World Cups, obviously you don't need fin pads. So I just
I think the pad pocket's a bit bigger on SRAM brakes.
Yeah,
from memory, like they're always a bigger caliper by design, which kind of would do the same thing, I suppose. Kind of, not really. But I've done that. I have done the different. I've done the organic.
I was about to ask if you've
steel
run the
pad together as well. It's not terrible. It didn't spontaneously combust and cause any issues, but from a spares perspective and like a rotor perspective, it's an absolute nightmare. Like pads have to go in the same way every time. You know, if you swap it around the other way, you'll have the wrong amount of like the friction coefficient between the two materials touching. Like, I don't think you get optimum bite off the top because it's only one organic pad. And then I don't think you get optimum heat because the organic pad heats up as well. And it's just facilitating. It's not just facilitating the push, it's also dragging.
Do you think, like, sorry to go down a rabbit hole here, but we were talking about 220 front or 220 rear, 200 front before. Do you think there's any clout to running, say, a metallic rear and organic front?
Yeah, potentially. Like, I don't know if I'd want my front to be more bitey in that respect off the top.
Or vice versa.
Or vice versa,
That was
yeah,
just an
yeah.
example.
Yeah, you definitely could. Again, maybe it's just an OCD thing and a spares thing, but like, I wouldn't want the organic at the back because the organic would just heat up and just melt pretty much.
Yeah.
But it depends on where you're riding and the conditions, especially as well. Like, I think if someone wants to try it, could be good. Like, especially if if you were, if you did like your levers really, really close to the bar and brake pump was an issue, maybe organic's going to be a bit better because it's always going to be a little bit better off the top if it does start pulling to the bar. It doesn't get as hot. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen anyone run different compounds front and rear. I'm sure it'd be something people would test out.
I know I never have, but anyway,
I'd have to do some research. I think I've heard about it.
Yeah,
I think I've heard of someone, and if it's going to be anyone, it's going to be Greg Manar.
Yeah, because he does the separate pads each side quite regularly.
Does he?
Well, he runs both. Like, he has whatever. Like, they have three. They have bags, and one's, as you said, with the rotor and the pads. They're all in separate bags, and they're all linked together, and they're all bedded in together. And then they've got a metallic sintered and then a mix.
I think Lyle said it on the Downtime podcast as well. It's like always, and I can't stress enough, always new pads and new rotors, but always, like, if you're going to replace your pads and the rotors a bit cooked, beyond where you replace the rotor, but if not, use the same pad that you had existing, because what gives you the reason you bed your brake in is you're actually depositing amounts of that brake pad into the rotor surface. So if you swap them around, so if you've got an organically bed in rotor, there'll be acoustic issues in the way that they touch and resonate and all that kind of stuff, but you're not getting the optimum braking power on it because you've got something that's going to kind of melt away going into metal. And then the other way around, normally, is people have metal and put organics in, and they just howl like there's no tomorrow because it's kind of almost slipping between those little bits of metal on them. So that's if you're going to go play with different setups, because I definitely, if you've got access to brake pad stock at the moment, I would just make sure you're using a rotor and doing exactly what Darren's saying, and having them in different bags and keeping an eye on what you do with them, and you have a wet set and dry set. But that's really, really important for optimum braking. I think there was one other question I wouldn't mind doing, which was just the one with the code brakes. There was a guy who was having issues with codes or how to get them working. I think he was saying after every run he was having issues. There is a big thing with SRAM brakes, and I'm sure it could happen in Shimano, I just never worked on them, where the compression nuts are not being tight enough in whatever factory of they're coming from. So if you've got
workshop,
or workshop, if you've got a brake where you bled the thing and it feels mint, and then you do a day ride or whatever, and it starts going to shit. As long as the brake pads aren't worn, if your brake pads are worn on SRAM brakes, where you measure the backing and the pad, and it's anything less than 3 mil, that's too far gone. That'll just be pistons flexing, and you'll change your pads, and then the brake will feel mint all the time again. But if it's not that, and your brake pads are running mint, check that compression nut. The most telltale sign if it's loose is the bolt will be very rusted and it will be wet. At least the top couple of threads will be wet, and that's just the dot fluid leaking out. If that's the case, I would take it to your bike shop if you're not good with how you do that. If you are good with bleeding brakes, it's fine. But I would definitely take that compression nut out. I would inspect the barb and olive, make sure it's all running hunky-dory. Hopefully it's the correct one. If it's not, which I've seen a lot of as well, be scared. With that nut needs to be greased. It's really important they're greased. And then look, for the most part, I don't really use a torque wrench as much as I probably should. But these come in the bleed kits, and it's a 8 mil crow's foot. But those bolts are a wet torque effectively. So it needs to be greased and then tightened to 8 Newton meters. And that will compress the olive enough so there won't be any leakage, and it'll also bind the bolt up enough so there's no leakage. So I reckon 90% of brake issues I saw when I was working at SRAM was that compression nut just wasn't tightened up enough. You tighten it up, give it a bleed, get the air out, and people come back like, oh shit, my brake's working again. So that's a big one. Check that. And dot grease is important. I have seen people talking about using other greases on those. Please don't. Dot grease doesn't have dot fluid in it, but it's dot safe. So it doesn't have any oils in it. If you use any other grease and it touches any of those seals, they'll blow up.
Yeah, I've never thought about it, but that's a really good point.
Yeah, and then when you're greasing
I didn't really know it was an issue, but yeah, that's a really good point.
It's massive, yeah. And like there's a whole host of issues with the barb and olive. I don't know if you've seen the SRAM ones. The barb threads in, so you need to grease the barb as you throw it in, and then that just contacts the top of the line. It doesn't need to tighten too much or it bunches it up. And then a little bit of grease around the top threads, and the barb actually threads onto that line now. So it sits perfectly flush. And then you also grease the olive, and then you also grease the compression nut, and then you tighten everything up. And then I'm
a fan of the, for sure. I am like, it's picky. It's a picky thing, but like, I am a fan with SRAM of the thread-in barb.
I think it's one of the best things that could be done with brakes.
Shimano, like, just say for instance, Shimano barbs are a pain in the ass to get in.
Just floats around, right? A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, you're trying to like knock it in, and then you get the little yellow spaces to try to grip the hose, which just don't grip because it just slips. Like they're shit. Like a thread-in barb is it's sick. I think
it makes more sense, and because when you do actually tighten the nut up, it tightens the like the whole setup all together, and it all makes it all nice and tight.
Yeah, it pulls it in. Yeah, for sure.
Probably air seal, I think is key. Yeah, that's one of the cooler things I've seen. That being said, though, I've heard a lot of people blow up at it. Like, I need another bloody T-tool and I need grease. Cool. But Shimano does make that really cool.
Who doesn't have a set of T-tools these days?
There is a very big spectrum of repair stores I've seen. I'll say that, but yeah. But Shimano does make that.
Say it from the outset.
Yeah.
If you're going to run SRAM, get a set of T-tools.
Yeah, and get the proper bleed kit. Like, get the pro bleed. If you're going to buy a bleed kit, buy the pro bleed kit. It's way better, and it comes with all those little fittings and pad spaces and stuff. I wish it came with dot grease. It doesn't, but you can buy that. But Shimano does make that really cool line cutting and barb installer tool now, which is pretty sick. It's like a 2-piece system. It comes apart, I'm pretty sure, and one cuts the line and another one actually does the barb, which that's a way better way to do it from them, I feel now.
Jaguar do them as well, which is another brand I like. So they've got a cutter, and which is what SRAM uses for the old brakes. Yeah. Same thing. So they're really cool as well.
Yeah, with SRAM's plastic is red and Jaguar's is yellow.
Yeah. Or if you're Dave Rome, you get the Park Tool HBT1 hydraulic barb tool. It's metal. It squeezes with a lever. It's a bargain at $199.
I saw Dave bought that roll-off chainbreaker. I've actually never seen anyone buy it. I need to look more into that tonight, I feel. I scroll through my phone.
He's bad for your wallet.
Oh, dude, I was having a mad chat with him about the did you see the valve switch he put up this morning? Yeah, I was like, dude, I need that. And he's like, you'd be surprised if people have no idea what it was and thought it was a joke. And I was like, no, that's sick. Like, I normally just leave them on the bench on the corner and just let it hiss out. But that's fully a thing. And I'm like, that's so awesome. But now he's got a 3D printer. I think it's dangerous. Like the stuff he's going to make.
I just undo the valve core.
Yeah, there's some, especially on like I still deal with tubes, but on road bikes where they're not removable valve cores and all that kind of stuff. Or if I know the tires aren't super tight as well, I don't want to take the valve core out because too much air comes out too quick and then it unbeads itself. So I do kind of like the slowly taking it out sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, that's a quick shout out to anyone that likes tools and wants to see a crazy amount of ridiculous tools. Go follow Rome and Stuff on Instagram, and it's ridiculous.
I honestly hope that whatever the company is that they're now employed by helps pay for all that tools, a lot of those tools, because there is a lot of tools, like a lot of tools. I'd also love to get my bike repaired by Dave one day, because I know he's got every tool, and like seeing him do hub replacement, free hub replacement stuff, like that'd be so sick.
He has. Sorry, we're going down a rabbit hole. I know you guys are tired, but this is very interesting. He had two tools for a Campagnolo bottom bracket. One was for if the bearing's been pulled out of it, because the tolerances are different. So the tolerances on one tool were tighter than the ones where if the bearing was in it. So he had a tool for each situation. Like that's the level of depth he's going into. And yeah.
What a man.
Which I think is deserved on, like, especially if you're doing, and I know why they do that, because I've seen it done wrong. But on Campy Super Record, like, you kind of need to have that, or you'll destroy those very nice cult bearings very quickly.
The heap's cheap too. All right. Well, I think that's it. You guys go have some dinner and some sleep and move on. Thanks so much.
I was going to say one thing before we exit, just because it popped into my mind last night when I was thinking about the fact we had this coming up. And that is, I think there's, and Lachy, you can probably attest to this as well, I think there's a common misconception among some bike riders where they confuse modulation with a spongy brake.
Oh, yes. 100%.
And it really, like, I hate to keep it going, but it really grinds my gears. Like when someone's like, oh, dude, I just love the extra modulation that this brake's got. And it's like, no, dude, it's because the brake isn't fucking working. Like you ride that thing hard, like you do more than, like if you took that to Maydena, it just wouldn't work by the bottom.
Yeah, lever throw and modulation are very, very different things. It still needs to have power at a very specific point of where the plunger is in the brake lever. If that's not the case, it's because there's air in it and it's because it's spongy, the air is compressing, the brake's not working. And I 100% agree. Like, I don't think a lot of people know what modulation really kind of means in a lot of brakes.
No.
Like, you hear a lot of brakes that are very on and off, which you can get with inline levers quite a bit. So much modulation. It's like, is it really? Like, yeah. That's a different rant for other day. Yeah, that was a good stew rant. I used to have a lot. Yeah. So I agree.
Yeah. I think that's what people confuse with Shimano brakes, with that on-off feel a lot.
Yeah.
Is that they're so damn easy to bleed that they actually just work a lot better.
Yeah, they just work all the time. And like, I guess
most of the time.
Yeah. Shimano's like personally, I don't mind just on or off. But yeah, they're always just on or off. Whereas some brakes, it's like, hang on, is it modulation or is it just hell spongy?
Yeah. Anyone can get anything out of this podcast before we go. Get your brakes bled. Buy a professional if you don't have the kit. And if it's
don't mix and match.
Don't mix and match. And if you are getting your brakes bled by a SRAM brake person, make sure they've got the right stuff and make sure that their dot fluid they're giving you is fresh. That's a different rant I didn't get into, but dot fluid, if it's sitting in a bottle for too long, goes off. Buy the fresh little bottle from them, and it'll be nice and fresh with a seal. Don't get the old stuff sitting in the workshop. If they don't know how old that bottle is, get a new bottle.
Always have a date on it.
Write your date on it. Date your dot. I've got all my bottles there. Write the date on it when you open. Like, if it's over 3 months, I wouldn't use it. Buy little bottles if you just for you as well.
100%. Yeah, rad. And for mechanics, brakes are a safety piece of equipment. They're not a component. So always make sure that you know what the fuck you're doing before you work on them.
Watch the bloody video or read the manual. Like, just check it. Like with any brakes, just like, because even Shimano I see done wrong all the time. You know what I mean? Like, and I get
how.
Yeah. Oh, I meant to gravity bleed. Yes, you are meant to gravity bleed on those. And yes, it isn't the easiest thing in the world. And yes, I do use syringes sometimes, but I kind of know a little bit of what I'm doing with that. But I also take personal responsibility with that if that was the case. But yeah, just do it properly, please. That's the one thing you need to do it properly on, I reckon, the most. Like, the most.
100%.
Yeah, like your gear's going to be sloppy, your suspension can be a bit sticky, but your brakes need to work.
Because they stop you when the rest of that shit fails.
Yeah.
Right.
All right.
Cool beans.
Well, thanks,
Sweet.
guys. Enjoy your sleep. I'm going to
will.
eat food.
Good to see you. Bye.
You too, guys. Cheers.
Take care. See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
There you go, guys. There was a little bit of rambling from me, Lachy, and Mick. Hopefully you got enough out of that to understand that brakes are quite complex, yet simple things to maintain and are easy to keep running. Thanks to Hold It Flat Mitch for the best question when it came to ergonomics of brakes. It's quite a overseen thing, and playing around with the angles, make sure everything works 100% for your riding style is almost number one when it comes to brake performance. That, bleeding, making sure everything's working 100%, and don't mix your brands. God damn it. Anyway, thanks to our supporters, as per usual, Lead Out Sports, number one supporter of this podcast, Taylor Trails, FE Sports, NS Dynamics, Franked, Dirt Surfer, Crush, and Fist. Thanks for the support, guys. If you want to support our supporters that support us, lots of support, jump over and grab the products. If you want to support us a little bit more, jump over to the new Beyond the Tape website, beyondthetape.com, grab some merch, buy me a coffee, do whatever. If you want to do something for free, tell your mum, tell your nana, tell your mates, tell your brother, tell your uncles, sisters, brothers, dog, about the podcast and share it around. Review, subscribe, like, do all those things as well. Thanks everyone for the support, and we'll catch you on the next one.